So rumour has it, in 1993, a player discovered a loophole so huge that he could win the finals of an event by ripping a card up into pieces and throwing it at his opponent. I wish I was joking. The card was called Chaos Orb, and it was from early Magic the Gathering. It said you had to throw it above the table at least 1 foot high, and it had to do a full flip rotation. And if it did, it would destroy any non-token permanent card that it touched. So all of a sudden, Magic the Gathering wasn't about card strategy. Table size was a massive influence. The space between your cards became a huge lifeline. Players would start to spread their cards out like they were trying to dodge an explosion. And judges, whoa, they were having nightmares. Because what exactly counted as 1 foot when you were throwing the card? What about if it slid across multiple cards on its way down? Or what if it bounced? The rule books or the card didn't have any rules to fix this. And allegedly, a sneaky player in the finals of an event had a brainwave. If this card destroys everything it touches, what would happen if the card was in multiple pieces? So he literally tore the card up and threw it at his opponent. The logic being more pieces, more surface area, more contact of other cards, so more board wipes. Destruction caused by impromptu arts and crafts. And somehow Chaos Orb wasn't even the only card like this, because there was another card called Falling Star. Same idea, throw it a foot high above the table and it had to do a full flip on its way down. Except this time whatever it touched would take 3 damage and would get tapped as well. So real tournament matches were being decided by throwing accuracy of all things. Not sequencing, not deck building, not clever play, literal dexterity checks. Eventually, Wizards have realised that something very serious is going wrong. So both cards were banned from tournament play. And they were clever because to future-proof themselves, they said, all physical dexterity cards are now banned from competitive play. Which might mean for the first time in TCG history, a tournament was won with arts and crafts. So if Chaos Orb was banned because it turned games into throwing contests, this next one was banned because no one knew what the card actually did. I'm talking about Ancient Mew from the Pokemon trading card game. If you were around in the year 2000, you've probably seen this card because it was a promotional card given out to people that watched Pokemon the movie 2000. It looks incredible. Gold foils, ancient hieroglyphics, but no readable language in sight. And the card back isn't a normal card back either, which for competitive card play is a massive problem because cards all have to be uniform. For obvious reasons. And of course everyone has to know what the card did, which at first glance you wouldn't know what Ancient Mew would actually do. This of course was ripe for abuse. Now technically inside the promo card's packaging it said that if you was to go to a local Pokemon league you would get a cheat sheet so you knew what it would do. And once translated the card was pretty terrible. 30 hit points, psychic type, retreat cost of 2 and then 40 damage for 2 psychic energy. Didn't have much use in the meta apart from being a sneaky okay counter against Mewtwo. So if it wasn't very good, why did it get banned then? You see, there was nothing stopping you from sort of lying to your opponent and saying, oh yeah, this attack actually did for 2 energy 150 damage. And without the cheat sheet at hand, you couldn't prove it. So judges couldn't verify what it would do at a glance, your opponents couldn't read it, with no way of checking without external material. All of this resulted in Ancient Mew getting a swift tournament ban. This next card though fully broke any tournaments that players tried to play it in. Victory Dragon from Yu-Gi-Oh! On paper this card is ridiculous. If Victory Dragon attacks your opponent's life points directly and reduces it to 0, you don't just win that duel, you win the entire best of 3 match right there and then. So if you did this on game 1, there's no need to play games 2 and 3, you would advance as the winner. So just shake my hand please. Now to be fair, Victory Dragon isn't easy to summon. You couldn't special summon it and it would require 3 dragon type tributes to get into play. So not exactly meta defining, but that wasn't the problem, oh no. The problem was how duels worked in real life. Because in Yu-Gi-Oh! You could concede the match at any time. So if I looked like I was in a losing position in game 1, I could concede and move on to game 2. Meaning that if you were staring down the barrel of a Victory Dragon about to reduce your life points to 0, all you had to do to stop them was concede the match and move on to games 2 or 3. Before the Victory Dragon's attack could complete. Meaning the duel would end before the damage went through. Which means the match winning ability was actually useless because no one would ever let it go through for obvious reasons. The Victory Dragon players were annoyed, their opponents were as smug as anything. leading to judges being called left, right and centre, and quite honestly the judges couldn't do anything about it. So Konami had enough and had just banned it from tournament play ever since. Bandai card games have just banned players from shuffling their own hands. Now if you've played TCGs, I'm sure you've seen you or your opponents do this, where either through boredom or distraction or just trying to concentrate, players will shuffle their own hand, whether it is or not their turn. But according to Bandai, some players attempt to do this to distract or intimidate their opponents. Huh? And it's that kind of shuffling that Bandai took offense to. So now if your opponent is shuffling their hand loudly, you can call a judge over and they will get dealt with. But if you want to shuffle your hand quietly, that is still fine. This next card would also waste a lot of time, but for a completely different, but for an equally maddening reason. Shahrazad from Magic the Gathering. On the surface, it is a beautifully designed card. Look at that artwork. But its effect, outright ridiculous. When you cast Shahrazad, you and your opponent would stop playing your current game, and at this point your ears should be pricking up, and you would start a brand new game of Magic the Gathering, right there using the remainder of your deck that you was playing in game 1 to start playing game 2. When that sub game would end, the loser of that sub game would lose half of their remaining life, and after that you would go back to playing the main game. How ridiculous is that? But the real scary part of this madness was, you could play 4 copies of this, so you could use this multiple times. Games inside of games inside of games. A sub game within a sub game. What? Players were having to track multiple different life totals at the same time. Multiple battlefields, multiple libraries. It wasn't really strategy at this point, it was more administrative skills. Meaning you could get quite toxic with it, because if you noticed your opponent had sort of discarded a lot of their key resources in the first game, you could play Shahrazad over and over to make sure in the sub games they wouldn't have access to them anymore. Clever, but tough. And again, this was ripe for time abuse, because if you won game 1, you could just start playing multiple Shahrazads in game 2 to make sure that game wouldn't end, and then you would win the match on time. And to be honest, it rightfully started testing players' patience. And today it is banned in every sanctioned format, because Wizards finally realised that if a card would take upwards of 15 minutes to complete, it probably shouldn't exist. Next up, we have a strategy that was so broken it stopped your opponent from playing the game. It was 2008, and at a Yu-Gi-Oh! Regional, one player entered with a deck called Button Turbo. The key card, Self-Destruct Button. Here's what it did. If your life points were 7,000 or lower than your opponent's, the game would end in a tie instantly, by reducing both players' hit points down to 0 at the same time. So all you had to do was spam cards that would lower your hit points, like Inspection, Wall of Revealing Light, or any other self-damaging effects, to be honest. You would chip yourself down, and then use Self-Destruct Button to move on to game 2. So at this point you're probably thinking, so you're forcing ties, how is this helpful? Well, it would take advantage of the 2008 Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament structure, because you would win a match if your life points were higher than your opponent's when time was called. So the game plan was simple: force a draw in game 1, force a draw in game 2, and then going into game 3 you would side in a little bit of a burn package. And what you would do is chip out your opponent's life points just a little bit, and then play pure defense to make sure when time was called your life points were higher than your opponent's. And quite honestly, your opponent could do nothing about this. You wasn't really outplaying your opponent, you were just outlasting them. And at the time there was nothing in the rule books to stop your opponents from doing this. Your opponent didn't really get any meaningful play, but it didn't matter. If you was on the other end of this, you were sat there twiddling your thumbs. Eventually, Konami have had enough and they banned Self-Destruct Button because it weaponized the clock. Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't ban it for its power, they banned it for its toxicity. But now, let's talk about the time Magic the Gathering officially endorsed you gambling for your cards at sanctioned events. I'm talking about Contract from Below. It cost 1 black mana, and it said, as an additional cost, add the top card of your library to the ante. Then discard your hand and draw 7 cards. But first, we need to explain what ante meant, because it wasn't just a flavor text, it was actually a mechanic at the time. At the start of the game, both players would take the top card of their deck and put it into the ante pile, and whoever won the game would keep both cards. As in, own them. You could walk away from the table with them, and if you lost, you would lose that card from your deck permanently to your opponent in a real game of Magic. This created a few problems. First of all, legal issue. This would constitute gambling in a lot of regions, which then opens up these events to a lot more legal scrutiny, which Wizards didn't really want to deal with. Second, optics. Magic the Gathering was marketed towards teenagers, and I'm sure parents would be livid if their child came home saying that they had lost the most expensive card in their deck due to a card like this. But the biggest issue in a tournament is tournament integrity. How exactly would this work? If you lost 2 cards from your deck in round 1 because of an ante, moving forward in the event, you now have an illegal deck because your deck that you're playing with doesn't match the deck list that you submitted. How do you fix that? Realistically, every player would need to have multiple spare copies of going into an event. It's just a nightmare. So Wizards, quickly realizing what was going on, removed all ante cards and the mechanic from the format entirely. Every single ante card gone, and Contract from Below was the face of that ban. Now next up, this doesn't quite fit the video, but I really wanted to talk about it. This is when Gift Energy was banned in the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online client, and actually ended up potentially affecting the next regional championship in a major way. You see, heading into Salt Lake City regionals, the Regigigas deck was fun, it had a few results, but it didn't have the draw power to keep up very high maintenance gameplay style. You see, Regigigas ability Ancient Wisdom would let you accelerate energy from your discard pile, but only if you had one of each Regi in play. So you could power up the attackers very quickly, but you also had to reload them every single turn to make sure you could keep attacking. However, going into Salt Lake City regional, a new set was about to be legal, and that was Lost Origins, which had a card in it, Gift Energy, that seemed to fix that problem in a major way. You see, when the Pokemon Gift Energy is knocked out, you would get to draw 7 cards. And with Ancient Wisdom, you can keep attaching that Gift Energy to all your attackers, providing you draw power throughout the whole game. Except problem, Gift Energy really didn't work on the Trading Card Game Online client. You see, when you would try to activate it, it would soft lock both players, meaning you had to Task Manager close it and restart the program. So Direwolf, the developers, had to place a quick ban on Gift Energy while they attempted to fix it. So with that ban in mind, Regis instantly fell off the ladder. People didn't really want to play it in its old form, and they had a lot of new toys from Lost Origins, other decks that they wanted to play instead. Which means people weren't exposed to the new power level of Regis. They weren't losing to it online, which means no one was really teching for it going into the regional championships. It went really under the radar, meaning Azul and his testing group took that regional over, with multiple players from that group hitting in the top 8 and beyond. Azul himself made top 4 with the deck. So here's the question, if Gift Energy had worked on TCGO, more players would know how strong Regis was, would they have teched for it, and if they did tech for it, would it have placed as far in that event? Who knows? And lastly in this video, the next card we're going to look at here caused players to straight up lie to each other, and no one could prove who was actually right. Birthday Pikachu. This card was originally released in Japan in 1998 to celebrate the 2nd anniversary of Pokemon. The English version had a much stranger journey. It first appeared as a promo card in Sydney, Australia, and then later in the US through a bizarre mailing contest won by Wizards. For a while, rumours suggested that the print run was tiny, so prices climbed to about $500, so the card sort of became this mythical oddity. But the real chaos wasn't the release, it was the attack. Birthday Surprise did 30 plus damage. If it's not your birthday, flat 30. If it is your birthday, you got to flip a coin. If heads, the attack would do 80 damage, that is monstrous. If tails, you would do 60 anyway. So if it was your birthday, you was always getting a flat 30 damage or sometimes an extra 50. For the time, this was monstrous. But the issue was, you would have no way of proving to your opponent that it actually was your birthday. So in theory, anyone could just rock up to an event, say it's my birthday, and instantly have the best attacker in format. Because what are you going to do? Ask your opponent to get a passport out mid-match or something? How does that work? Especially if this was the juniors or seniors division. What a mess. So upon hearing reports of this, Wizards banned it from competitive play. But the real funny part is, in Japanese, all prints of this card said that this card wasn't legal for tournament play. But in English, for some reason, that line was omitted. Next, we're going to look at a joke that went way too far and actually ended up forcing Yu-Gi-Oh! To change its rules to accommodate for it. 2007 German Nationals. 2 players dressed up looking real sharp. But that's not the problem. The problem is one of them entered with a deck that was 2,222 cards big. Sorry, what? It was so big they had to build a special contraption to stop the deck from falling over. For context, at the time, the only rules about deck size in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the deck had to be a minimum of 40 cards. There was no rule on how big a deck could be, which meant this monstrosity was perfectly fine and legal. So you're probably wondering, what are the problems of a deck like this? Well, number one, table space. But then secondly, how do you sufficiently shuffle a deck this big? You have to shuffle your deck whenever you do, searching interactions, for example. And our sneaky player here knew this. They specifically put a lot of cards in there that would let them search their deck, just to waste as much time as possible. So just imagine, for round 1, you were sat down against this 2,222 card deck, and there your opponent played a searching card, and you had to sit there for 10 minutes while they concluded it and try to shuffle the deck afterwards. This deck wasn't here to win games. It was designed just to draw attention to and take advantage of the deck size loophole. You would either draw the match going at a time, or your opponent would concede because they were bored just watching you. Trolling on a pure structural level. But this is where it gets more interesting, because the players who did this weren't just everyday players, no. They were actually judges who knew the rules inside and out, and that's why they did this, to draw attention to Konami about just how mad this could potentially be. Eventually, the judge ruled that it was impossible to sufficiently shuffle this deck and politely asked the players to drop, which they did. Then here's the interesting part. Less than a year later, Konami changed the rules to say that a deck maximum size could only be 60 cards. Coincidence? Maybe. We'll never get full confirmation, but I'd like to think those two judges are the reason for that rule change. But if you made it this far, please like the video and consider subscribing and hyping the video if you're watching on mobile. And why don't you watch this video here, where I sat down with the GOAT of Pokemon and we went through his best and worst plays on stream.